these pieces all start out flat, and these shapes are all cut out, and then I bend them and then tack weld the whole piece together, which takes me a while. I use clamps and just prying on it and bending on it until it all gets together, and then I'll come back and finish all the seam welding on all these edges here, and then I'll start the finishing process after that. So right now I'm just going to hook it up to the welder. So we attach a negative to it. Turn on our gas, which is argon. We have our welding helmet, and this is a automatic welding helmet, so it's kind of like the darkness of sunglasses. But then as soon as the arc, which is super bright, goes off, it goes much darker.
Oh, right on.
And so that way you can kind of see what you're doing when you're not welding. And what that welding gas does is it comes out around the electrode. So the middle part is the electrode. That's where the little electric flame comes out. And then around it is this tube, and that's where the gas comes out. And it's not a flammable gas. It basically is the opposite. It pushes away the oxygen away from the flame so that it doesn't burn, and so it can melt instead of burn. Otherwise it doesn't, it just kind of bubbles and it doesn't work very well.
Just becomes a lighter.
Yeah. So now I just kind of clear the tube a bit and we'll get started on that.
Are you having them cut with the
It's laser cut.
It's a laser cut? It's
Yeah. So this is pretty much how it comes, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, that is. Like no burrs or anything.
Yeah, I just go over it with a little hand sanding just to kind of, sometimes it has a little bit of a burr, but it comes really nice. And also, just having this computer cut pattern, I mean, they really get to be pretty complex in their shape.
Right.
But it's one thing when it's flat, but in order for it to be all bent together and all come together with these very tight seams like that, is pretty hard to do, unless you use these kind of tools. Prior to doing the laser cutting, I did everything by hand with a handheld plasma cutter, and it's just a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
Leaves a burr that needs to be all ground off, so I'd have to come back and grind every edge, and also the pattern, I couldn't get it as tight. And these patterns are just right, so if I build it right, it'll come out right.
Right.
I mean, they still come together different every time, just because, just the nature of the process. And you can see, like, well, if you start at one end here, which is what I do, and I have my bottom plate, and you start bending and tacking it together, well, it only takes a small little bit of being off one way or the other, and then as you go over time, it starts to
spiral
get bigger
out.
And bigger and bigger, so whatever error you make, it's going to just get worse. So I have to try and correct it along the way, which is what I do. I'm probably ready for a correction here pretty soon, because I think I'm getting off. Some of the designs have a natural kind of way to check them. This one does. A lot of them don't, but this one does, where I can and put a square on it. And so that one looks pretty good right now. You know, this one looks like it's starting to get a little off square. So then, you know, if that continues to go that way, by the time I get to the top, it's not gonna work.
Right.
So I'll have to try and correct that. So maybe I can get through this one section and then try and correct that. Now I've got these heavy-duty clamps. Help me break this all together. Now the light is very bright.
Right.
And it doesn't hurt cameras as far as I know, but
I'm still gonna stand
too
on
much
the.
with your regular eyes, it probably wouldn't be a great idea.
Got it.
Stainless steel is also very stiff metal, so it doesn't want to bend very easily.
So it's physically melting the metal to the metal.
Yeah, in this case, if you get the metal touching,
Right.
then I can melt it together. Um, the frustrating part is that you can have a tiny little crack between the two pieces of metal where I don't even see it, but then it just melts away from each other. And you're like, why? That's another part of, like, you know, having a tight pattern and getting it real tight and everything. It just works a lot better that way. It also turns out cleaner in the end too, because we're going to have to do a lot of grinding and sanding.
And when you, okay, so from here, from this, it's just grinding and sanding to get it to this.
Right, but we'll do a seam weld. I'll do a quick one right here just to show you what that'll look like. So we'll go back and do this on the entire piece, and then we'll come back and reform that edge so that it's smoother, and then I'll sand the entire piece down.
And again, that is just the steel. There's no...
That's just stainless
steel.
No
other metal,
yeah.
Just the stainless steel to itself.
Right. So it has very little, you know, contamination, and which is good, you know, so they can be outside and weather much better. When it works really well, it works great. There's times though when I run into some of the curves on this are really hard to get, and you know, it'll take me a long time just to get a little ways, you know.
Yeah.
And then other times it'll be like, you know, zip zip zip.
So when it's all welded this way, it's basically becomes one piece, right? So it's not, there's no chance of it opening up down the line or anything like that.
No, it'll be pretty indestructible. I mean, the problem with these is that once I get a really fine finish on there, it can scratch. So, you know, we have these nice, beautiful stainless pieces that seem so pristine, you know.
And then they scratch when you're moving it, that kind of thing.
So, right, if you're not careful, you know, and you bash into, you know, another piece of metal or something, then it can scratch.
And can you mix the metals? I mean, can you do like one panel bronze, one panel stainless?
Yeah.
That kind of thing?
Yeah, you can weld bronze to stainless, and you can weld mild steel, like metal that's going to rust, with stainless steel. That's also possible.
How does it affect it in the long term? Nothing. I mean, stainless steel stays stainless.
Right, exactly.
Except for whatever stains come from the rusted material.
Right. Yeah, I do have some pieces where the rusted metal drips down onto the stainless and stains it, you know.
How heavy are the bases that you put on them?
They're heavier. I use a 1/4-inch steel. I definitely want it to be heavier. Most of these are going in houses and backyards and stuff where people aren't that concerned, but some people are.
Is working the bronze the same as working the stainless?
Um, well, the bronze pieces that I make are made the same way, where I'll cut out these patterns and weld them together and finish them. But bronze is it's much more expensive as a material because it's mostly copper.
Mm-hmm.
But it is much softer, so it's easier to bend. It's much easier to sand.
Do they roll it out into sheets?
And you can buy it in sheets. Yeah,
Okay.
That's what I do. So it's fun to work with. It's just it is a lot more expensive, and it's a different look. You know, you can't quite do the same thing. And I really like the look of the stainless. The problem with the stainless is it's just so stiff and hard, and so when I come to finish it all, it's a lot of really hard work to grind it and sand it and finish it. So that's the main deal with stainless. But it is a really nice alloy, and it welds really nicely. So that's the good part about it. And it, lasts forever too.
Yeah.
But so will bronze. Bronze is really super durable. So that's the good part.
And then the finish that you put on them, the sort of the matte finish, is that done just with a grinder or a sander?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah. Yeah, we can do some of that too at some point here. I can show you some of that. It's done with a disc.
Uh-huh.
Special Scotch-Brite disc. It looks like a Scotch-Brite scrubber on a disc.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
But it lays down a very smooth finish.
But before that, you have to grind out all of the rough edges and smooth out the corners.
Before I do that, I reform the edges with what's called a flap disc, and it looks like sandpaper that's stacked in little stacks on a disc. I'll show you these things. So this is the Scotch-Brite scrubber disc, and then this is the flap disc. See, it's all these little layers of sandpaper. So that's what I do the edges with, and then this is what I do the whole thing with. And they're on a hook and loop back.
Okay, so you just slap it on there.
So yeah, it sticks together like so. Back into shape, and now it's out of shape. Going back. It's time to mount.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I didn't know they had that capability.
Yeah, I want to get a bend in here, but this will be what I want. Without ruining these 50-year-old knees of mine. With stainless steel, you don't want to scratch it if you want to have a really fine finish on it.
Mm-hmm.
So then I discovered the stuff where you dip this
like
plastic stuff.
Right, like for rope ends.
Dip the edges so you don't scratch the hell out of the thing while you're making it.
Right.
That helps a lot.
And it's soft, malleable, like
And
that's great.
Helps it stick to the metal too, which is nice.
Yeah, but once you have finally gone out and, like you said, allowed yourself to buy an expensive clamp, you wonder why you did not do that years ago.
Yeah, I do wonder that.
Yeah.
Well, I beat myself up. Yeah, that's another thing. Is the easier you can make it to work, the more you can actually work without killing yourself.
Go for it. How long does it take to finish one?
They're very labor intensive, so it takes quite a long time, and it depends also on what the shapes are. Like some of these curves are pretty mellow.
Right.
You know, this is starting to get pretty steep, but some of the pieces have harder curves, and I can really have to fight with them. Sometimes I actually have to weld things onto it just to be able to get a hold of it, because the clamps won't stick to it. You know, once you start getting angles, you can't really clamp it anymore. And sometimes I even weld the clamp to the piece temporarily to be able to grab it and get it to come together.
Do you ever leave it just welded like this without finishing it out?
No, I haven't. Although it can be kind of interesting that way, but it does get, usually the tops are really hard because they have that closing in where the angle gets too steep, and then that's a real challenge. A lot of the middle areas oftentimes are the easy parts, you know, and then it gets tough in certain spots.
I was noticing, like this one you've left rough on the edges rather than.
Well, that was
grinding
done
it out.
in the early '80s.
Yeah.
So
Your rough period.
Yeah. Well, I had no idea about these kinds of tools and materials then.
Oh, really? So it's just a matter of progression in the work.
Yeah, I actually did make a piece in that time that was more structured like this, where I built like a box. But only did one of those, and most of them were like these cutouts like that. And with the regular oxygen acetylene cutting torch. And,
So clearly that had to have been a lot less expensive to manufacture.
Yeah, and I would buy all the metal at a scrap yard that was used metal. You know, these all come brand new sheets, and they're much more expensive, of course.
Right.
But yeah, I still got that old piece. That's pretty old too. It's from that same era.
And are you just adding in more stainless steel?
Yeah, yeah, it's the exact same stuff.
Yeah.
There you have it.
So that's the finished seam, and then all you have to do now is to get the finish even across all of it, is to run it with the buffer, right?
Yeah, actually, I might as well just run through the whole program here. So after that, that's the 40 grit.
Okay.
Then we go down to 80. And then I'll also do a little bit of the fine finish too, might as well.
Okay. That'd be good just to see how it goes from start to finish. Okay, now this is the Brillo pad
Yep.
kind of thing.
Different grinder too.
Okay.
Slower speed. There's a variable speed.
Right. It's beautiful, man. I notice you're keeping all of your strokes the same way.
Yeah, that's
Everything's
kind of how I do it. You know, you could do all kinds of different patterns.
right.
But you know, my pieces are really about the simple lines and the flow of the whole thing. So I'm not wanting to busy it up with you know, different directions and so forth. Or it's really more about the long, sweeping, sensual lines. That's really what I'm interested in. Changing things over time and keep refining it. And like my bases have changed over the past year, and I think they're so much better now. People like them a lot better, look better, probably more durable.
Dude, that's awesome. I have a fly walking around with lens. Did you tell me that they were going to be 2-inch steel? Is that what you said?
Actually, it's a 1/4-inch steel.
1/4 steel.
But I have the edges. I used to weld on the sides to make a box for the base, and then those get bolted on here. But now I actually have the sides formed down with a giant, you know, press, and that way I don't have any welded seams on the side, and it creates this nice radius with the 1/4-inch steel.
Oh, right
And
on.
you know, there's no edge to break down. It's much stiffer.
How heavy is that?
They're heavy, but it's nice having bottom heavy.
This stuff here is just surface burn.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's discoloration from the welds.
Yeah, because it just seems like so easy for it to just vanish, you know?
Yeah, you can just sand it off. Right?
Yeah. And it looks like you're not putting much pressure on it. You're just letting it
Yeah,
ride.
it is some pressure, but also
For this finish?
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And also, you know, I start out with a fresh disc, and I try and hit all the bad spots first.
Okay, yeah.
Because it slowly gets less and less sharp.
Sure.
But it's kind of nice to have it less sharp when I go over the last bit of the sculpture for the final, you know, 5 or 10 times, because it kind of leaves it a little smoother.
Yeah.
Instead of starting out with it so rough. And then the smoother it is, just the nicer it is to the touch, and the more stain resistant it'll be as well.
Okay, tell me it again now.
Okay. This all starts out in big 4-foot by 10-foot sheets of stainless steel. This is a very high grade of stainless steel. It's called 316L. And what we do is program a computer to cut out all these shapes in that sheet. So it's computer controlled, and it just, the laser traces over the surface and cuts out these shapes. A lot of big fabrication shops have these things. They're pretty expensive machines, but that's where I go. Is a friend of mine works at one of these places, and so I can even email him a preset file